So for those of you, this might be your first time on the call, I do want to tell you a little bit about Cause of America. The role of Cause of America is actually to enable, facilitate, and support citizen grassroots action to restore trust in our local elections. It's really about building a network of individuals, organizations, and partners who can learn from each other and work together to solve the most pressing issue facing our nation today, which is, of course, free and fair elections. So you guys don't want to see me. The person you came to see is Dr. Frank. So he has such a special place in my heart because Dr. Frank came to Pennsylvania when we first got started in 2021. And he had, been working in Pennsylvania prior with some of our legislators who, at the end didn't do anything, but he has been just absolutely amazing. He's gone around the country basically teaching people how to protect our elections. And he's done this presentation, over 650 times? Well, your old one, right? This is a new one.
Well, it was growing as I went because it was always new.
He has such a special place for us in Pennsylvania. And I know a lot of you guys are on here know Dr. Frank. He's absolutely amazing. He treats everybody like their family, and, we're just so thankful. So, Dr. Frank, I will let you, go through all of your fun background, but I will say if you guys have some questions, please put them in the Q&A tab. If you don't see that, you can put them in the chat, but we want to make sure Dr. Frank gets through this because he already had to break it down a little bit even more, so I want to give him as much time as possible. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, sir.
All right. Hey, good to see everybody tonight. I'm talking about something that's near and dear to my heart, but I've been asked to do something impossible, and that is to teach you how to audit your voter rolls. And so what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to try to summarize what to do and do one deep dive.
I'm going to jump in here with you, Karen, while we're waiting on Dr. Frank. I see a lot of really good questions and people that have not played with their voter rolls before. Somebody had asked, is there a cost to get your voter rolls? It depends on your state. It varies state to state. And I was really upset when I started because I had to pay $20 to get Pennsylvania's voter rolls. And I had to pay it weekly. But it was important to me, so I did it. $20, it added up. And then I started looking at other states, especially once I joined Cause of America. And I was pretty happy with $20 because although it should be free, and there are states that offer it for free, like Florida or New York or North Carolina as an example, there are states like Alabama, which charge roughly $40,000 for their voter rolls, which is absurd. It's cheaper to buy every other state's voter roll than to buy one copy of Alabama's voter roll. The cost is a barrier to entry. The federal law implies shouldn't be there. So most states offer it very reasonably. There are a handful of states that are very excessive in their cost. So depending on your state, it varies, but I would encourage you just go to your state's website, look on the elections department page, search for voter roll, and you should be able to find a cost. I think we have Dr. Frank back, so I'm going to stop filling for him here.
Well, good to be with everybody. I was with you last time about a month ago or so, and that was a very well-received talk. I really enjoyed it. And basically, I've been given an impossible task, and that is that I'm supposed to try to explain to you the voter rolls with only an hour. This could be days of work. And I want to explain why we care about the voter rolls and what we're doing. This first time through, I'm going to go through all the concepts I need you to understand, and I'll do a couple of deep dives, but not a whole lot, because we could spend hours on this. But Michelle said you guys are going to invite me back for another deep dive. So I'm going to get us going here. So anyway, I want to give you some introduction and context. Why the heck are we looking at voter rolls anyway? And the strategy going forward. And right now, I can't stress this enough. Time is of the essence. I've been telling everybody we only have 1 year to take back our elections. I don't think we're going to win the midterms. And God bless him, Trump's up there doing all kinds of wonderful stuff at the top. But I liken this to World War II. It's like we're bombing Berlin. That's Trump. He's bombing Berlin. Well, it's our job to take Normandy. We have to build the infrastructure, and we have to take Normandy. And then the battle is still ahead at that point. So it's like we've got them in a squeeze play, which is great. But I think we've got to get going now. We're out at war. We've got 1 year is the way I look at this. So what are the voter rolls and how to get them and how to cheat an election? And I'll talk about that a little bit, and then I'll cover some basic concepts, what we're looking for in the rolls, the various federal things that are involved in that, and a few concepts, reconciliation, churn, what demographics, and what the role of the machines are. And I want to pause on that for a minute, because Mr. Lindell, of course, that's his main thing. He wants to get rid of the machines. And I agree, I want to get rid of the machines too. But I'm talking about the voter rolls. Now, I'm a computer guy, and to me, a computer's a machine too. I want to get rid of those too. The machines are not what I'm focusing on tonight. They play a role, though, so I want to connect it in and show you what's up with the voter rolls. And then I want to give you a few strategies of what I'm looking at when I'm looking at the rolls and to get you thinking in some way. So anyway, it's a big topic, way too big to cover in just an hour, but I'm going to do my best to cover it in an hour, just leave time for questions. I really liked the question and answer period we had last time I was on. It was really good. It's like 30 minutes long, and I think people wanted to go even longer. But anyway, Karen has to take care of her babies. The other thing is I always have to tell everybody, because otherwise I get in trouble from my planners, I'm a scientist. I'm a real scientist. I have 60 scientific peer-reviewed publications. I have a PhD in surface electroanalytical chemistry, which is basically mixing lots and lots of numbers with lots and lots of equations and big data sets. Does that sound like an election? Yeah. In fact, relative to what I'm used to working with, these are small data sets. So I really am a scientist, and I love working with data, which is why I love working in the roles. Now, I want to start at the beginning for a good reason. You're going to see why this is important. I began my work in the election work in December of 2020, and guess who was on the phone with me? Vico Bertoli. And he called me and said, hey, Doug, would you help Kathy Burnett with her election? We want to audit the election. You remember that Doug Mastriano had requested an audit, and we had legislative backing. And so I remember calling him, and the first day I called him, he said, yeah, we were having trouble with the statistics, and we would like you to help us. And I said, stop. Don't tell me anything else. Just send me your data. Because I didn't want to poison any of my thinking. I wanted to have a fresh, clear mind going into the data, and I began working in the voter rolls. And boy, I found all kinds of stuff going on. Called back Vico. They did some door-to-door canvassing to confirm what we'd found. It was awesome. So anyway, Vico and I, right from the beginning, were working in voter rolls. I really think voter rolls are what we need to do. Then of course, Mr. Lindell discovered me in March of 2021 and made a movie about it. And the movie he made was called Scientific Proof. If you haven't seen that, basically what I did is I used the voter rolls to prove that the elections were not natural. They could not be natural. It was statistically impossible that they were natural. And so it was called Scientific Proof. It's about an hour long. It's a fun movie. I loved watching Mike in that movie. I watched it again, I don't know, about a year ago. And I laughed the whole time because Mike was learning it for the first time. And he was getting pretty excited about it, but that's his personality. And then another 30 minutes of our interview is in this movie, Absolute Interference. So if you haven't seen those, I think those are nice slices of history 4 years ago. At that time, of course, we were thinking that all we needed to do was show the world the evidence. And if we showed them the evidence, they'd all say, oh, no, we got to fix our elections. And we thought if we showed our legislators the evidence, if we showed the president the evidence, because any common sense person would say, gee, there's a problem with our elections, let's fix it. But what we didn't anticipate was that the people in control already know, and they ain't about to give up the control. So anyway, I got to give the same evidence. In fact, when I spoke at the president's rally in Wellington, Ohio, it was his first rally after being out of office, that's what I was focusing on. All of us were focusing on the evidence and the data, and we thought that's all we would needed to do. We were wrong, and I could go into that more, but let's just move on because I want to get you into the roles. So anyway, after that, since December 2020, I've traveled the whole country, and I've been focusing on meeting with local teams and teaching them how to use their voter rolls. That's how I got the nickname the Johnny Appleseed of election integrity. All right, but I'm taking you back in history for a reason here. In the early days, all of us were asking for audits in 2021. We were saying, we want transparency, we want audits. And so did I. And I was going around the country and I would meet with clerks and I would say, we want an audit. We don't believe this election's real. And they were all saying the same thing to us. They were saying, well, we can't do an audit unless you give us a reason to do an audit. We need evidence to justify an audit. You have to give us evidence. Now think about this. We're suspecting the machines, but they're not giving us access to the machines, and they're not going to do an audit unless we can prove there's a problem with it. Well, they're not giving us what we need to prove there's a problem. But at the time, you remember, that's when I met with Tina Peters, and we got the forensic images. And so we were very machine-focused in those days in 2021, less so on the voter rolls, more on the machines, because we were sure if we could just show that evidence to everybody, that would be the thing. And a lot of people know about Tina Peters, but a lot of people don't know about Lake County, Ohio, where we also got forensic imaging during their election in the spring of 2021. And the FBI came in and investigated, and there was no wrongdoing anywhere, just like there was no wrongdoing in Tina Peters' case. When the Secretary of State found out that we had all this stuff in Ohio, he panicked, just like the Secretary of State in Colorado panicked. The reason I bring that up is I just wanted to help you understand the mindset. There are still a lot of people in this mindset, and we have to break them out of this mindset. We don't win with the evidence. We need the evidence, but we don't win with the evidence. We win with the movement, which is why I've been teaching everybody how to do that with the 7 steps. So also, we don't have access to the machines. Go ahead, ask your county leaders, hey, we want to get access to the machines. They're not going to give it to you. But you know what? They will give you access to the voter rolls, and they can't stop you. And so that is why I focus on the rolls. We could scream all day about wanting to get access to the machines, and they're not going to give us access. But we do have access to the rolls. So we fight with what we have. And that's the point. That's why the rolls are so important. So anyway, there are lots of ways to cheat an election. One way would be to add votes. Some people call that ballot stuffing. Other way, you could remove votes, ballot suppression. You know, the post office could just drop the ballots in the alleyway on the way polling place. Another way to cheat an election is to change votes. Once you've turned in the ballots, they could change them. Or they could flip them in the machines. Or another category would be to change the counts. Everything might be perfect, everything might be counted perfectly, but then at the last minute, somebody flips the counts. All of these ways we have found examples of because we've been scouring these elections for 4 years. So they're all possible, and they all are happening. But in order to detect whether votes have been added, you need to audit the voter rolls and the voter history. We have access to that. To know if some votes have been removed, you need access to the voter rolls and the voter history. We have access to that. To change votes, we would need to have access to the ballots or the machines. We need court orders for that. Hard to do. We can get CVRs sometimes, but they're not very powerful without the ballots and the machines. And then also changing counts, we would need them to be transparent. We would need to be able to audit the whole process. That's why I like the voter rolls. We have access to it, and we can prove ballot stuffing and ballot suppression with it. And I'm going to go into that. So we've won an important battle, right? We got Trump in office. Hallelujah. I like what Tony Shoup said the other day from Pennsylvania. She says, we've been given a temporary reprieve, and it feels like a miracle. And I believe it's a miracle. It's providential. We've won an important battle, but what's next? Well, that's where I think everybody comes in, and why I'm so happy to talk to you about the rolls. This is what you guys need to do. And what you can do, and you don't need a court order, okay? You can do all of this stuff immediately. And that's one of the nice things about Cause of America is that, you know, Vico, who I heard him talking a minute ago, I love the guy. We've got more voter rolls than just about anybody, I think, in the country, and we can happily help you with your county. So this is cool. In other words, we're in a war, and we've got the weapons, and we got the training. We'll be happy to help you with that. Anyway, it's lovely having Trump up there signing executive orders every day. Hallelujah. We are having a great time watching this, aren't we? But the time for celebration is over because we are at war. And, you know, we've taken a major battle, but we got to get to the next beachhead. I like what Colonel Waldron says. He says we got to keep moving forward. And in war, he says that's the number one rule. You just keep moving forward. I love that. The key principle is that we're the government. We need to start acting like the government. We haven't been. We've been like we're frogs in the pot. We've been doing this for decades. We've forgotten that we are supposed to be the ones being the government. We've been letting other people be the government. I love what General Flynn says about this. Local action gives national impact. So a lot of people are trying to focus on passing legislation, or let's write Trump, or let's get Trump to do something. No. You think about it. Everything Trump is doing, I love it, by the way, but everything he's doing is reversible by the next administration. So while he's bombing Berlin, We need to be taking the beachhead at Normandy. We need to be building the infrastructure underneath to make it more permanent. We need to ratchet in the progress we're getting. Now, I've been reading a lot of books on war because we are at war. And in The Art of War, Sun Tzu has a great quote. He says, you can be sure of succeeding in your attacks if you only attack places which are undefended. And that's why I was mentioning before. If you're attacking the machines, they're defending that. It's going to be difficult to win. I'm not saying you can't, but it's a defended place. Sun Tzu goes on, you can ensure the safety of your defense if you only hold positions that cannot be attacked. Everything that I'm proposing to you is totally legal. So what's nice about it, and totally available to you. So we aren't trying to attack where they're defending. We're defining our own battlefield, and that's a key principle. Now, a second big key principle, and I run into this all around the country. It's very frustrating to me. I've explained it over and over again, but people are just slow to get it. I understand because we're all kind of in a paradigm shift here. Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So I can't tell you how many times as I travel the country, I'll come into a community and somebody will run, Dr. Frank, I've got it. I've got the lawsuit. This is the one. This is the one that's going to fix everything. And okay, what is it? And they tell me. And it's like, I've heard that story 23 times already. No, it's not going to fix it. So a lot of people are on hamster wheels. And one of the things I love about these national calls is we need to bring people together. They need to learn what's working and what's not. And we need to have a unified strategy. In war, you don't wage a war by all of us just running and grabbing our guns and running at the enemy. That's how you lose a war. The way you win a war is you come together, you form war councils, you make strategy, you do research, you plan, you study the enemy. Where are they strong? Where are they weak? There's a lot in that. That's basically what is in my 7 steps. That's what I'm teaching people to do, is how to make those councils and what strategies to do. So, but a lot of times people say, well, Dr. Frank, we don't know what to do, so we're going to do something. No, that's wrong. You spend your resources when you do that. Sun Tzu again, move not unless you see an advantage. Use not your troops unless there's something to be gained. Fight not unless the position is critical. I just got to tell you, I hear this all the time, and I want to say this carefully. I hear people come up to me all the time, Dr. Frank, we're cleaning the voter rolls. I'm sorry, my friends, that's not a good strategy. Cleaning the voter rolls is a bad strategy. However, all the stuff you've been doing to try to clean the voter rolls, all we have to do is just aim that a little differently, and it's a very valuable strategy. So it's not a complete waste of time. But, I was just with a group the other day, and they said, oh, Dr. Frank, we found hundreds of people that needed to be removed from their voter rolls. We turned in all the challenges, and the county and the state are just ignoring us. And I said, so what did you do? And they said, we prepared another list and turned it in. And what happened? They rejected that too. They aren't doing anything. What are you doing now? Oh, we're making another list. Now, wait a minute. That sounds like Einstein, definition of insanity. Are you expecting that to work? Well, why are you doing it over and over again? Cleaning the voter rolls is really not the right approach, and you'll understand it as you understand the rules a little bit. There's no silver bullet, guys. There isn't one thing that's going to work. We need to have a unified front. We need to have a strategy, and that's where I'm going. Build a war council. The key idea here is that America is an experiment in self-government. You need to be running your own elections. We shouldn't be having other people running elections. So the question is how do we take them back? Because right now, in every state in America, elections are centrally controlled by the state. There isn't a single state left where the counties are controlling the elections. Some of them think they are, but they're not. And I come into those counties and I show them that they're not. And what did Stalin say? He said it's enough that the people know there was an election. The people who cast the votes decide nothing. The people who count the votes decide everything. Aha! So are you counting your own ballots? No. Now, a lot of times you have people say, well, all we have to do is get hand counting and that'll fix it. Nope, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's one element. So it's not merely who's counting, but how they're being counted, and is every voter a real voter? Basically, we've forgotten that we the people are the sovereigns in this country. For too long, we've been paying other people to run the government. We've been paying other people to teach our children and other people to run our elections. We need to be running our own elections. It's time for us to return to our sovereign duty. That's what this is all about. So now I'm about to dive into the roles, but I just wanted to make my offer to you. Start building local teams, and we'll coach you. That's what Cause of America is all about. We'll connect you. We'll help you with the resources you need. This is my email. Send me an email. Sign up on Cause of America. If you're here now, you already know how to get into Cause of America. I don't charge for any of my work. I'm happy to go around the country. Been working a lot in the last several weeks with Audit the Vote PA, for example, and we're building a statewide infrastructure. We're fighting a war, remember, so we shouldn't be fighting individually. We should be fighting with a combined strategy that we know works. I've been teaching them my 7 steps, and basically it's taking back our elections. How do we take back our elections? So I promise you, if you'll start building a team, I will come, and I'll help you to learn how to take back your elections. Now, the first question is how do you get your roles? I'm done with my introduction. I'm diving into getting to the meat of this now. How do you get the roles in the first place? Well, you also need the voter history. You don't just need to know who's on the list. You need to know who voted. And I hear this all the time. People say, oh, Dr. Frank, we found, 600 people to take off the voter rolls, and we turned it in. And I asked them this question. Did any of those 600 people vote? And they look at me blankly. Wait a minute. You didn't even check whether they voted or not. If someone doesn't belong on the rolls and they voted, that's a case of fraud. So one of the first things I teach people is when you're working in the rolls, you're focusing on who voted. Not just necessarily are the rolls dirty or not. I mean, if everybody was honest, it wouldn't matter if the rolls were dirty. The dirt is important because it enables people to cheat. But the problem is cleaning the voter rolls is, I'll come to that in a minute. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Where do you get the voter rolls? The Secretary of State, I heard Vico talking about that earlier. I don't need to repeat what he said. Basically, there's state websites you can log into. A lot of states, it's free. I'm in Ohio. You just log on the Secretary of State website and download it. Same in Florida. Same in North Carolina. A lot of the states, you just download the rolls. They're free. The voter history, everything. But some states are expensive, and that's where Mr. Lindell came in the early days. I remember the day he bought Alabama's voter rolls for $30,000, and the day he gave me $10,000 plus $25,000 to get Wisconsin's voter rolls and run it through another database so that we could get the age of the voters. But not all the states are expensive, but a lot of them are. And I remember the day that I testified or turned in my deposition for the Michigan case. Matt DiPerno was prosecuting the intra-Michigan case. And the day that I showed how to analyze the voter rolls, 6 states took down their websites that allowed individuals to download the voter rolls because they realized we had them. The voter rolls are a way to get to the fraud, and they realized it. So they were like covering their bases. That's one place to get it, but not in every state. A lot of states won't give them to you anymore. My favorite is to go to your local election official and ask them for the voter rolls, because then you're also building a relationship and you're putting them on notice that you're auditing the voter rolls. That makes them unhappy. I'm telling you, they don't like it when you're auditing their own voter rolls because it exposes all the problems. Another place to get your voter rolls is from your party. But I caution you here. The Republican Party gives out rolls a lot of times, but they're pre-filtered rolls. And they're trying to help you focus on what they care about, which is we want to get Republican voters to turn out. That's not the rolls you want. If you get it from your party, you're asking for the raw data that comes from the state. So I caution you on that one. You can also get rolls from your candidates. In fact, in Northern Kentucky, we had a candidate run for office just so he could get the voter rolls for us. So that's another way. And the candidates are entitled to the voter rolls because they use those to do their canvassing and whatnot. All right. First thing that happens when people get the voter rolls, happens every time. They go, Dr. Frank, our voter rolls are horribly dirty. Yes, they are. And it doesn't take long to figure that out. Anybody who's been door knocking knows that it's dirty. So I just prepared this graph for the 2024 election about a month ago, I think. And I prepared a short video of this on my YouTube channel. It went viral. It's got like 12,000 views of it now. But I'm going to summarize it briefly here because we need some of these concepts for what I'm going to talk about. So what this graph shows is across the bottom is the voting eligible population. How many people in a state are eligible to vote? And then on the vertical axis, I'm showing you how many of those eligible people voted. This is important. Just pause here and think about this. I'm not graphing how many people are registered. I'm graphing how many people are registered of the eligible population. And a lot of times you hear election statistics quoted. Oh, we had 60% of our registered voters turn out. But wait a minute, the registered voters is a number that could be all over the place. So really that number doesn't really have any meaning. It's like the denominator and percentage is changed. So I like using the percentage of people who are eligible to vote in a given state. That's the denominator for each of these axes. So it's basically citizens over 18 years who are legally allowed to vote. So this is the percent of those people who are registered, and this is the percent of those people who voted. Eligible people who are registered, eligible people who voted. Now we can talk about the voter rolls. If you have more than 90% of your eligible people registered, I'm telling you right now, they're dirty. A healthy, clean voter roll should be 70% or so of people. It used to be lower. It used to be 50 to 60%, but now that we have all these automated systems, it's pretty typical to have a clean voter rolls in the 70s. So anything above 90 is highly suspect. Of course, anything above 100 is ridiculous. In other words, what you're saying is if a state has more than 100% of its eligible people registered, you know it's dirty. It has to be dirty. So that's what this horizontal axis is all about. Now, what I've done is I've shown you, like, if 70% of the eligible people are registered and 70% of them voted, that would be the 100% line. So we're never going to have any data up in here because we're never going to have more people voting than we have people. That would be ridiculous. So, but I'm showing you the 90% line. So this would be if 90% of the registered voters turned out, or eligible voters, this would be 75% of them, this would be 55% of them, just so you can kind of have a scale for comparison. And this is, like I said, this is the ideal, between 70 and 80%. If you had 70% of your eligible 18 years and older people registered, that's a pretty good voter rolls, pretty clean. You should never have more than 100, of course. By the way, I got these data from the U.S. Census and the official turnouts state by state. It was a couple of days' work for me to get all this. Now, there are 9 states, Virginia, Wisconsin, Michigan, etc., that have more people registered in their voter rolls than they have 18-year-old eligible voters. Think about that. 9 states. So obviously, look at Alaska. Oh my goodness, they're up around almost 115%. Those are really dirty voter rolls. And a lot of times people say, oh, but it's only 15%, Dr. Frank. No, it's 35% too many people. There's one bad person in the rolls for every 2 good ones. That's a bad rolls. So it's not just the 100% line that's bad. I think anything above 90 is really in bad shape. And in the 80s, it's kind of dirty and they need to do some cleaning. So I just want you to see our country's in bad shape. Our voter rolls are a wreck. 9 states have more people registered than they have eligible voters. Here's the whole rest of the country. And I just circle Wyoming because they have a particularly aggressive cleaning strategy of their voter rolls. And that's why theirs is so low compared to all the others. Basically, if you don't vote in an election, they put you on hold. You have to prove yourself at the next election. It's very aggressive. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just very aggressive. Tennessee, I had to ask them because I don't have the statistics yet. I need to find out what their actual turnout was versus eligibles. So I think they're probably more up in the pack. But anyway, the same with Maine. From the 2020 election, Maine's up here. I know they're up around 110%. Anyway, this is just what I could do as of early January. So I just wanted you to see the whole country has dirty voter rolls, and all you have to do is start knocking on the doors, and it's immediately obvious. And one of the things that's brutally obvious about it is the turnout of eligible people is extremely high in one state versus another. Are you saying that those people in West Virginia and Missouri and Mississippi and Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas, that those people are less patriotic by 20% or more? I don't think, people in Wisconsin are so much more patriotic than people in Kentucky. I don't think so. But anyway, the point is there's severe anomalies. And so these states that have high turnouts up here are probably states that also have a lot of stuffing going on. So anyway, we can talk about that. I got to go faster. I didn't mean to spend that much time on that. If you want to see more about this, you can go to my YouTube channel. It's called US 2024 General Election Animated Graph, and I spend more time on it. I need to keep moving. I promised, because I want to give you guys some time to ask me some questions. And that's my YouTube channel right there. Should we be trying to clean the voter rolls? Let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to give you examples of this. So here's, for example, this is the state of Kentucky from 2017 to 2023. And this blue line represents their 18 and older population, not even their eligible. Their eligible would be lower. This is just their 18 and older population during that time. And then this red line is the number of people in their voter rolls during that time. And you notice that the number of registrants is growing faster than the population. Well, that's crazy. And then right before the election, it went right past. So in the state of Kentucky, they have 105% of their people registered. They have more people in the voter rolls than they have people available. That's one of the ones. Now, right here is an interesting divot, and that's one of the reasons I brought this up, is because Judicial Watch sued them because they've not been complying with HABA and VRA. And they won the lawsuit, and the state was required to remove a bunch of people from the rolls. This was the minimum number they had to remove. But then the ACLU countersued and put them right back in again. And plus, so one of the reasons I'm showing you this is a lot of people say, we want to get rid of the people in the voter rolls and we're going to sue. Well, I'm telling you, all around the country, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because the lawsuits are reversed, and it's not just one county. It's like 80 of the counties now in Kentucky. Anything in red is a county that had more people registered than they had people. LA, Los Angeles, they had to remove 1.2 million people. And what's interesting, what's different about LA is when they removed them, the voters that didn't belong in the rolls, a month later their voter rolls were completely full again with new non-real voters. So you think you're cleaning the rolls, but they're just putting them back. I was in Mercer County last year. Patriot drove me around to one of the events. It was right around the time the president was shot. And he was so proud. He said, Dr. Frank, we're a small county, like 8,000 voters, and we got 600 of the voters out of the rolls. I said, wow, congratulations, good work. So I sat down with him. We uploaded the voter rolls for his county, and guess what? It was full again with new non-real voters. That's the problem. I understand the sentiment that you want to clean the voter rolls. The governor of Oregon halted their registration from the DMV because they discovered that they were registering illegal aliens. So I understand the sentiment that you want to clean voter rolls. The problem is that cleaning the voter rolls is like cleaning your kid's room. You're never going to be able to keep the kid's room unless you lock the kid out. Same way with the voter rolls. The fact that the voter rolls are dirty is not the problem. The problem is that you are not in control of the voter rolls. If you were in control of the voter rolls, you could clean them and keep them clean. Somebody else has access. I was just on a call the other day with some people from Audit the Vote PA. They have dozens of non-government organizations, NGOs, that have access to the voter rolls. We were looking at a new list of it. It's amazing. Wait a minute. What do you mean? You mean non-government people can put people into the rolls? Yes. So you're busy cleaning up the rolls, and they're busy filling them back up. So the problem isn't that the rolls are dirty. The problem is that you're not in control. You need to stop the ability for other people to make your rolls dirty, and the only way to do that is to have local control. So what are we looking for when we're looking at the rolls? And I need to make this distinction. I always tell people, I show this little example. People say, we want to recount in the election, Dr. Frank, and we want to audit the machines. But I always point this out. I say, look, it doesn't matter how many times you count the cash in the cash register. What matters is how many of the bills are counterfeit. Everybody wants to focus when they're auditing the elections. They want to focus on the machines. But I think that's a mistake. And you could look at the Maricopa example. They recounted all the ballots. And it was 2 million ballots right in that vicinity. And the recount comes out the same. And so what do the officials tell you? See, we have no fraud. The recount came out right. Wrong. We shouldn't be auditing. I'm not saying we shouldn't audit. We should always audit every part of the process. But we shouldn't be auditing the counts. We should be auditing the voters. We should be auditing the ballot. Is every ballot from who we think it's from? And we can do that. And we don't need a court order. We just have to do the work. We just get the rolls and start doing the work. Now, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So here's a typical county. Just call it a schematic county. And this is their population over here on the left. So what happens is there are a certain percentage of a population that's underage. They are never allowed to vote. They're too young to vote. Some people are not eligible. They're foreigners or they're felons or something like that. And that tends to be, I've done a national study, it's about 4% on average. So you got your total population, some are underage, some are not eligible. These would be legally eligible to vote, this green bar. Well, in normal life, about 1% of people die every year. So over a 4-year period, in between federal elections, you would expect about 4% of the people in your rolls to have died. So somebody's got to take those people out of the rolls. So you've got the 4% not eligible to vote. You got the 4% of it have passed away. Also, people don't live in one place. About 9% of people move each year in America, but about 2/3 of them stay within their own county. So after a 4-year period of time, you would expect to have about 12% of the people in your rolls you need to take out because they've moved away. So now you notice what's happening is the people who are properly registered is getting smaller and smaller in your county, and people that are being removed, this is growing down here. The people that have moved away, the people that have passed away, the people that are not eligible to vote, the people that have been removed, this is growing down here, and this is shrinking. So the rolls naturally accumulate improperly registered voters. In fact, in many rolls, we find tons of people who are not even real. And you don't even have to have some fraudulent behavior to have non-real voters. Sometimes it's just screwed up applications or whatnot. So let's say we have an election and about 60% of the eligible population turns out, with pretty normal turnout. Well, now look at all these people that didn't turn out that are names that are still in the rolls. Think about it. Every one of those names, you could put a ballot in for them. That's the problem. That's what we're up against. And ideally, it's a clean election. And let's pretend that you had somebody win 55 to 45%. Okay, that would be, great. That'd be a good, clear win. What if you wanted to cheat this election? What if you wanted to flip this so that it wasn't 55-45, but you wanted the other person to win? What if you wanted to cheat? You know how you do it? You use this reservoir right down here. And what happens is you harvest out of those non-real voters, you stuff ballots. That increases the turnout. We call those phantom voters. And it's surprisingly little you need. All you have to stuff is about 8%. You increase the turnout by 8% and you can flip a 10% win. Stuffing is a very powerful way. And if you look at our election turnouts over the last few years, we don't have low turnouts. They're all high turnouts, much higher. Biden had 10 million more ballots than anybody expected. That's not suppression of ballots. That's stuffing of ballots. So that's an important concept. And you could suppress ballots, right? The post office could throw them away, or I'm not accusing the post office. I'm just saying that you could suppress ballots. You could throw them out. You could reject signatures and whatnot. But in order to reverse a 10% win, you'd have to decrease the turnout by 14%. It's hard to cheat an election by stopping ballots. It's easier to cheat an election by stuffing ballots. I'm just giving you the numbers so you can understand. Now, the machines could be flipping ballots as well, and that's what a lot of people think is happening. But in order for us to prove that, we'd have to have access to the machines, and you still have to flip 7% of the ballots. That's a lot of change to make. So that's why I like focusing on the voter rolls, because that we can work on that. And I just want to give you one simple example. And this is why I said a year ago, March, that the Republican strategy of saying we're going to try to take back the election, we're going to try to win the election by registering people and harvesting ballots. I had already done the calculations, and I just want to illustrate it to you here. I calculated at that time that the most we could possibly get if the Republican Party did an amazing job around the country, and Turning Point was doing that all over the place. Oh, this is how we're going to protect the election. I did the calculation. The most we would be able to increase Trump's turnout would be 3%. And guess what? That's how much it went up. I've already talked about it in other talks. But anyway, so here's an example of a voter rolls. Let's say that 30% of the people in a voter rolls don't belong there, and you mail ballots to everyone. This would be an example like the West Coast. They mail ballots to everybody in Oregon and Washington, California now. So you mail it. Well, what you're really saying is 70 real people are getting a ballot and 30 ballots are going somewhere else. And let's say that 60 out of 70 of the real voters turn out. That would be a high turnout. That would be a very high turnout. And then one candidate wins, like I gave in my example, 55-45. The problem is there are 30 more ballots floating around. Or if you don't have mail-in balloting in your state, you could just think of it as there are 30 more names in the rolls that somebody could use to stuff a ballot. Okay, so here's the problem. There's way more available ballots than they need to overcome the win. There's a huge amount of available ballots. That's why dirty voter rolls are a problem. But like I said, cleaning the rolls doesn't fix the problem. You have to get control of the voter rolls. So how do we do that? So one of the first things I always encourage people to do once they get a copy of the voter rolls is do a reconciliation. What do I mean by reconciliation? You get a list of everybody who voted. Let me give you an example one. Here's for the state of California in 2020, this is what the Secretary of State said, how many ballots were counted in the election. But when you look in the voter history, which I've been telling you to get to, the voter history lists every person who voted. There are only 17,070,998 who voted. Well, wait a minute. They're missing 714,000 voters. In other words, they don't know who 714,000 of their voters were, who voted, and you counted a ballot from them. That's why reconciliation is important, and you can do it right down to the county level. You can do it right down to the precinct level. I'll just give you an example of that. So here, which county? This is Marin County, California. They have 158,000 people voted according to the Secretary of State, but if you look at the voter history, they're missing almost 5,000 of them. Well, who are those people? How are you going to know who those people are? And I'm telling you, the way you know is you need to have multiple copies of your voter rolls. You need to be taking snapshots. If you go to your clerk now, a lot of people think, we're going to audit the voter rolls, we're going to get an up-to-date copy. Great, get an up-to-date copy. But if they did that in Marin County, they're already missing 5,000 of their voters. So you need to know who's been in the rolls along the way, and you need to track that. And that's you being in charge of the election. So let me just give you a couple of examples of that. So here we are in over time. If you graph the rolls over time, for example, I always show this example around the country. People love this example. This is from Wisconsin. This is since 2009, November of 2009, up to the 2020 election and after. And you'll notice that the voter rolls, I'm showing it as a percentage, and I'm showing you the 3 largest counties. You notice that the voter rolls surge right before the election, and then they're purged afterwards. And they surge in the midterm, and then right before 2016, they surged again. Right, it was Hillary versus Trump. And then after the election, they removed 1/4 of the voters. So let's say you got a copy of the voter rolls at this point. Well, you're missing all the action. You need a copy of the voter rolls here. You need a copy of the voter rolls here, so you know what they're doing to the rolls. So that's why it's important that you get snapshots. And by the way, you notice that the voter rolls were all dirty again in time for the 2020 election. So they purge and then refill. And when I showed this Speaker Voss, he said, Dr. Frank, those are our biggest counties. There's a lot of turnover in those counties. No, it's in every county in the state. You notice that the voter rolls change in every county. This is a nice way to prove that the state is controlling the voter rolls. This isn't individual counties each controlling their own voter rolls. So it's every county, and I've done it in other states too. Here's Wyoming, and I even showed you Wyoming's got super clean voter rolls, but guess what? They have the same kind of thing going on. It's in every county. Now let's just talk about that. And I'm starting to dig in a little bit because I'm going to talk about something that a lot of people haven't thought about before. So it's a new idea. A guy in San Joaquin, Dave Robb, he coined this word churn. I think it's a good term for it. So we call it churn. Now, what is churn? So imagine that you're a county and you have 100 residents, and then 10 of those residents move away, and then 10 come in. Well, that's 20 changes to your rolls if you registered those 10 new people. So we call that a 20% churn. 10 moved in, 10 moved out. That's 20 changes out of 100. That's a 20% churn. Well, in order to do that, you'd have to have multiple copies of the rolls so you could track that. Well, I did this in Nebraska, and I tracked every county in the state over a 3-year period of time. And I discovered the amount of churn was the same in every county, about 33%. You mean the same number of people were added and removed from every rolls as a percentage? Yes. Big county, small county, didn't matter. It's hard to see numbers, so I'll show it to you a graph. Basically, all the counties have the same amount of churn, about 33%. But more importantly, they're removing people who voted in the 2020 election. And they basically removed, round numbers, 13% of everybody who voted from every county. So one of the things is when you go to your county clerk and you say, hey, how come you're removing all these people from the rolls? They'll tell you, oh, that's normal. We always take people that are inactive and they're dead and whatnot. They're removing real voters. And wait till I show you what that looks like. I'm going to skip this graph. And I'm going to come back to this with the demographics. So what this graph is across the bottom is the age of the voters. And the number of them, so the verticals. And the green is how many people were added to the rolls over time. And one of the things they'll tell you is, our county has a lot of college students being added. And that's what all the churn is. They're adding all kinds of different ages. And then this graph shows by age who's being removed. They're removing all kinds of ages. So one of the beautiful things about having voter rolls is you can analyze them with a lot of different variables. Here on the x-axis, I'm using the age of the voter, and that's what Mr. Lindell's movie Scientific Proof was all about. I was able to show if I can predict all the ages of all the voters. It's crazy. All right, so that's one thing. Now, there's another way to look at demographics. So I'll just give an example from Boone County, Kentucky. So this blue curve is from 1980 up to present. How many people are voting age in Kentucky? It's not eligible, it's just voting age in Boone County, Kentucky. The black curve is showing over that time how many people are in their voter rolls. The blue curve and the black curve were tracking pretty good until when? Until right in here. Then the black curve started growing faster than the population. Guess what happened there? That's NVRA, National Voter Registration Act. That's when the federal government started giving states money for automatically putting in people in their voter rolls. So that's sort of interesting. But you notice that it's out of control, and it's surged right past their population. They have more people in their voter rolls than they have people. This little red curve I've got over here at the end, I have it month by month since then. So I could show you that there's all kinds of funny business going on in there too. It's not just right after the elections. That's a good graph to see. But more importantly, not just do you have more people register than you have people, what are their ages? And so for that same county, here's for the 2020 election, you notice the blue, this is by age and how many people you have of each age. This blue curve shows you the population by age in Boone County, Kentucky. And you'll notice that the black curve goes past it all over the place. They obviously have way more people registered to vote than they have people, right? It's very obvious there. The red curve is who voted, but that's another talk. We'll come back to that. What I did is I went back and I compared multiple rolls, and their Secretary Adams was telling everybody, yeah, I'm cleaning the voter rolls, everybody. So I showed him two different voter rolls, and you can see the difference. You can see his cleaning job. What a good cleaning job he did, yeah? No, he removed people who voted because I can compare who voted. He wasn't removing inactive voters. He wasn't removing people who weren't voters. He was removing the people who were voting. You can see it. It's incredible. And obviously their voter rolls are still very dirty. Now, that's why you don't want to just use the total numbers. You want to look at it by age, and I'll give you an example. I was just in Montgomery, Ohio the other day, Montgomery County, Ohio. Here's their total population. It looks like they're shrinking a little bit, and the total number of people in their voter rolls. And you might look at that and say, well, gee, that's not too bad, Dr. Frank. They got 90% of the people still in there. Wait a minute, let's look at it by age. No, look at they've a ridiculous percentage of their people registered in the high ages. That's another way to look at your rolls. You look at them not just by number, but also by age. That's a big deal. I've done that down to the precinct level in many places, and that's what I wanted to show you now. So here's an example. This is in Placer County, California. I used this in Mr. Lindell's Moment of Truth Summit. What this is it's the number of people registered Republicans in every precinct in Placer County, and then the number of them that voted. And what you notice is it tracks this amazing line. In other words, it's completely predictable how many Republicans are going to vote in every precinct in Placer County to 0.9999 accuracy, R squared. That's preposterous, right? That seems crazy. And you'd say, oh, are all the counties like that? No, I've done all the other counties in California. Here's Yolo County, for example. It doesn't track a line. So it's interesting. Why would the exact percentage of Republicans vote in every precinct? So breaking down your voter rolls by precinct, by age, by party, there are all these different ways you can break them down, and you can find anomalies, and I wanted to give you an example of that. This happened in Washington County, Pennsylvania, working with Audit to Vote PA there, and I met with their county officials, and what this is the number of registered Republicans in every one of their precincts versus how many of them voted. And you'll notice that the precincts follow the line pretty good, but guess what? There are some precincts that are way off. Why would that happen? There are a bunch of missing Republicans from the rolls. So when I brought this to the clerk's attention, she was like, that doesn't make sense. What had happened is they have paper precinct books where people sign in to vote, and they had missed that book. They hadn't scanned in the voters. So when we audit them, we're able to find their mistakes. I love this. I love it when the citizens are auditing their own election and then calling the clerk to task. That's what we need to do. I'll try to finish with this, because this to me is like the way to find fraud in your elections. And I've been teaching this all around the country. I love this. Now, remember I talked about churn. This is an example from Oregon, Benton County, Oregon. And so what I've got is I've got 4 snapshots of their rolls with their voter history in Benton County, Oregon. One from right after the 2020 election, right after early 22, early 23, and it's like a 1 year apart. So these are each 1 year jumps. This is in March of 2024. In the 2020 election, they had about 68,000 people registered in their rolls. But since I have a copy of the rolls in January of 2022, guess what? I know how many people were removed. About 4,500 people were removed between this snapshot of the rolls and that snapshot of the rolls. And 6,600 were added. Now, if you talk to the clerk, she'll say, oh yeah, we had about 68,000, now we got about 69 or 70,000. Ho-hum, nothing really happened. Oh yeah? You removed 4,500 voters and added 6,600. A lot happened in between that. If you're only looking at the totals, you're missing the story. Okay, and I've done that for each of the snapshots. The other thing the clerk says is, oh yeah, we removed the inactive voters. Wrong! Out of that 4,500 that were removed, 4,000 of them voted. Were active voters. Only 500 of them, 1/9, were inactive. So if you're not auditing the rolls and you're just listening to what the clerks are telling you, you're missing the story. The clerks themselves don't even know. This is why it's so important that you take back control of your elections. What's happening is the clerks are relying on the state to do all the work for them. All the state's managing it, they're adding and removing the voters automatically for me. They don't even know what's going on anymore. So they don't even have the ability to screen the fraudulent votes and whatnot. You do, because guess what? You're going to be auditing the election. Now, like I mentioned in Nebraska, where 13% of the voters were removed, in Benton County, from the 2020 election, 17% of the people who voted in the 2020 election were already removed from the rolls after only a period of 3 years. And I've done this now in multiple counties. This is actually a low county. Many counties have even more removed. And they're not just removing people who didn't vote, they're removing 30% of the people who voted from the rolls. And that doesn't make sense. How come so many of the people who quote unquote voted are being removed from the rolls? And if you've heard my talks before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They've been added in, somebody stuffed a ballot, and then they're taken out. That's the problem. So I want to dive into the rolls just a little bit here. I could bring up an Excel spreadsheet, but it's faster to just kind of show you what I call a merged rolls. This is just a snapshot of one page from Benton County like I just showed you. Remember I told you I had 4 snapshots, one from 21, 22, 23, and 24. And what I've done is I've got the voters sorted. I've got these voters sorted. This is public record, so I'm not exposing anything I shouldn't. I've got them sorted by address. So at this address, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people registered at this address. 120 Northwest 4th Street, room 13. Well, over here, I show what their voter status was in each of the voter roll snapshots. So Crystal Kaler, I would say her name is, she was considered an active voter in each of those rolls. But the last time she voted was in 2016, because I show whether or not they voted in that election. And she hadn't voted since, so my guess is she's passed away or she's no longer in that care facility or whatever. She was registered in 2015. So see how it kind of tells a story about her. And of course, there's more over to the right that I'm not showing you. This is just a snapshot. Now take the next person down, Elizabeth Goodson. Well, she voted in every one of those elections, including voting in Benton County in the 2020 election. And she was considered inactive and active and then became active only in these elections. But wait a minute, how come she's considered inactive in 2021 when she voted in 2020? That's an anomaly. What's going on with that? But you're getting the point. It's telling you the history of this address. And look how many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 different people. Only 2 people have the same last name. But look at all the people that voted in the 2020 election from that address. That is a highly suspicious situation. So I call it a merge. What you do is you take the most recent copy of the voter rolls. Then you go back in history and you add back in everybody that's been deleted. Then you sort it by address, like I'm showing you here, and keep track of what their statuses were over that period of time. This exposes fraud every which way but loose. I mean, not only are the voter rolls dirty, look, all these people are considered active still in the Oregon voter rolls. You can see it. But wait a minute, they're all active from the same room? there's something wrong here. But anyway, I just give that as an example. And I may be completely wrong. This may be completely innocent. There may be a good explanation, which is why we use these merged spreadsheets to identify the suspect addresses. Then we go to those addresses and we knock on the door and we find out what's going on. Always we confirm, and that was one of the things I so appreciated about Vico Bertoli in the early days in Pennsylvania. They knocked on a bunch of doors and confirmed what we were finding. So anyway, this is what I call a merged data set. This is the way to do it, you guys. What I love about it is once you've made the spreadsheet, then you don't need a Vico Bertoli. You don't need a Doug Frank to give you this stuff. Once you have the spreadsheet, you guys can go look in your own neighborhoods. In fact, the first thing I always encourage people to do is once you get one of these in your hand, check your own neighborhood. I was in Polk County, Oregon, and the gal who was leading the effort there, she looked in her own neighborhood, and her next door neighbor had passed away a year before, but he had just voted recently. So there you go. Look in your own neighborhood. You'll find things. So I call this a merged data set. Let me reiterate what I do. You take the most recent copy of the rolls, and you take past snapshots, and you add back in everybody who was removed. Notice, remember when I showed the Wisconsin data that it's going up and down and up and down and up and down. If you only take one of those copies, you're missing all the action. You need to have the history. You need to know what's going on. So fortunately for us, what a different country we are today than we were 4 years ago. 4 years ago, we didn't have a clue what we were doing. There were some people that are awake, but the bulk of us didn't know what we were doing. Now we have teams all over the country that are doing these kind of audits right now, every day. In fact, boy, oh boy, we got stuff going on around the country. But that's not the subject of this. All right, now what are some other databases we can use? And this is, I'm delighted to talk about Vico a little bit here too. He will run for you the NCOA, it's called, the National Change of Address. So once you've got these names and these suspect addresses, you can cross-reference it to other databases like the NCOA. And you can say, oh, gee, the reason why these people aren't voting anymore is they moved to Timbuktu. But wait a minute, they did vote, but they moved to Timbuktu. Wait a minute. And so that's another thing you can use. And then the beautiful thing about being in Cause of America is we have teams all over the country. So if you find a suspect in your county and they move to Texas, we probably got a team there. And somebody can go knock on a door for you and confirm, wait a minute, they voted in both states. That's fraud. Except they probably didn't vote in both states. What probably really happened is John Smith moved from Oregon to Texas. He's voting in Texas, but somebody is using his ballot in his name back there in Oregon. By you auditing the databases and you working with our national strategy and you getting the NCUA, we can figure that out. The other thing Mr. Lindell asked for a couple years ago, he asked everybody to start getting CVRs. We can compare the tallies and things we get for the CVRs. I don't really think that's a voter roll issue. It sometimes overlaps, but it's really, I don't think, the strongest approach to go forward. But every once in a while, we get a detail or two. So I still do encourage people to cross-reference with the CVRs. Problem with cast vote records, CVRs, what they are, they're a record of what the tabulators see when every ballot goes through. So if you were to look at a line in a CVR, it would say, well, a ballot went through at this time, and the third bubble was interpreted as a vote for Biden. This bubble was interpreted as a vote for whoever. And it gives you the detail of what the machine does. But it doesn't tell you whose ballot that was. Unless you take that record and compare it to the actual ballots, bring out the paper ballots and compare them one by one, it has limited usefulness. The usefulness, the utility that we've had is because somebody like Jeff O'Donnell has been graphing those time series and showing this doesn't make sense. This can't be natural. This is violating all kinds of statistical laws. So it's still useful to you, but it's really not voter rolls. So I just wanted to mention it, though. You can compare to death records. And I give you an example of that. One of my favorite examples in San Joaquin County. A couple of ladies sat down in front of their computer for a month and looked up the oldest people in their voter rolls. I think they looked up something like 2,700 names. And what they were looking up in Ancestry.com and FindAGrave.com, Obituaries.com. And they were looking these names up, these two ladies. They worked hard for a month. And they found 49 people that died well before the elections, but voted in the election. So by comparing your voter rolls to other databases, notice you can find fraud that way too. That's a really good way to find. And citizenship records. And this is tricky, but we've been learning new ways to get citizenship records. For example, when a person gets a driver's license and then gets put automatically in the rolls, you don't know whether they're a citizen or not. But there are other databases that we have that tell whether they're citizens or not. For example, I'm a former business owner. And when I would hire employees, I had to run my employees through a database to find out whether they were really citizens or not. Well, guess what? That database is available, and we just need justification or probable cause, and we can do some searching. So that's another database. Another database you can compare your voter rolls is other state voter rolls. In fact, I think that's what Vico's spending most of his life doing right now, is compiling a comparison between multiple states. And we find the same voter in more than one state, and they're voting in both places. That's a problem. So that's the sort of thing the voter rolls are also useful for. So I've covered a lot of the different kinds of things. I think one of the most important things that you can do on your team, and I always tell people when they form their 7 Steps team, one of the first things you need to do is download the laws. You need to know the rules. You need to know what HAVA actually says. You need to know what motor voter actually says. Just today I was on a call with the team, and the lady said, oh, we asked our clerk that we wanted to get rid of the machines, and she said, oh no, HAVA requires us to have the machines. That is not true. And you need to know the rules better than the election officials so that you can go to your election officials and say, nah, that's not what it says. This is what it says. Or Huntington Beach, what a magnificent situation is happening in Southern California right now. They read their own rules and discovered that they're a charter city and that it says right in their charter that they're allowed to run their own elections. So they voted that starting in 2026, they're going to run all their own elections. It's going to be one day in person with a signature, photo ID, and in person, and they've added 120 new voting precincts. And the state of California is freaking out, saying, you can't do that. And they're saying, yes, we can. It's right here in our charter. So know the rules. You can't fight the fight and play the game unless you know the rules. As you need to know what HAVA and NVRA are. I think I can skip that. All right. Another thing you really need to be working on is taking back your party. And there are elections in your party, too. Because as you're taking back your local communities, and we had Ellen on a few weeks ago from Kentucky, as you're taking back that, you're going to have the ability to have more access to the voter rolls. And then the reason I'm bringing it up in this talk is because they cross paths all the time. The two are related to one another. And the precinct strategy is, I think, the best way to do that. Best one I've seen around the country anyway. And everybody needs to get involved. One of the things I love about voter rolls is everybody can do it. You don't have to have an IT degree. It's cool. Anybody can knock on doors. Anybody can, look up people. And the penalty if we don't do that is that we end up being governed by our inferiors, as Plato said, and he's right. And we have totally incompetent people in charge of our elections. If you want a reason to take back your elections, the people running them are corrupt and incompetent. We need to be doing that ourselves. I encourage everybody to establish a beachhead in their community. We got to get to Normandy. We got Trump bombing Berlin. We got to take Normandy. And so that's our job. We need to build that over beachhead. And I already made my offer. Here's my email again, DrDouglasGFrank@outlook.com. If you contact me, contact Cause of America, I'll come in for free, teaching you how to take back your elections. If you build it, I will come. I already showed you that slide. We need to vote Amish. All paper, no machines. All right, I'm ready for questions.
So we do have a few questions, but the first question we have, and you talked about this a little bit during your talk, but it's from Randy Ekman. He's actually from Blair County, Pennsylvania, a buddy of mine. And he said, I found that my county had 226 more votes cast than registered voters after examining the SHORE system for Blair County. What are possible reasons why that may happen?
Great question. So I would ask him, where did he get his list of registered voters? Remember after the election in Wisconsin that the voter rolls went down rapidly afterwards? Well, when I studied the voter rolls in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, after the 2020 election, 50,000 voters had already been removed from the rolls by the end of December. So if you were using the rolls that you got in the end of December and comparing it to the turnout in the election, it could potentially look like you had more ballots counted than voters. That's one simple example. And this is a perfect example of why you need to be in control of your voter rolls. If you're not in control of your voter rolls, you're not going to know all that stuff. You don't have access. And isn't it interesting that they won't give you that copy until after they've certified the election? Around the country, everybody's saying, what do we do during the election, Dr. Frank? And I would say the most important thing is the minute the election is certified, you need a list of everybody who voted. Oh, you want the voter rolls? No, I want a list of everybody who voted. And you can go to your county official and get that. Candidates have a right to that because they have a right to challenge everybody who voted in their election. So that's how you use that. Now, it's too late to ask now. If you haven't got them by now, too late because they've been changed since the election. However, we have so many people around the country that are now informed and engaged. We probably have snapshots that you could use.
Nancy actually asked, which it's something you talked about a little bit, but it says, are part of some of these discrepancies illegals who are voting? And how can we tell?
Okay, it's a fact. I'm telling you right now. It's a fact that illegal alien registrations are being used to cast ballots. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, remember the story when they caught the truck driver bringing 200,000 ballots from New York to Pennsylvania? Well, those ballots had to be assigned to a name.
Yeah.
Well, what if they assign him to illegal alien names? Okay, was it Jose Rodriguez voting? No, his name was used. A ballot was assigned to him. So what I like doing, and there was a case in an election overturned in Orange County, by the way, for this exact reason. Somebody had gone through a minority neighborhood and harvested about 280 illegal alien ballots. They weren't going to vote. They know they're not allowed to vote, but California mails ballots to everybody in the rolls, and they're in the rolls because they got driver's licenses. So somebody harvested all those and turned those in using their names, obviously. Most people are not criminals. Most people don't want to break the law, but it only takes a couple to take advantage. There are people in government who are on our side, who have access to databases that we don't have access to, that tell them whether they're citizens or not. And when we've done some all legal work, when we had probable cause with some law enforcement, we've been able to show that we have a lot of illegal aliens voting. And that, I think, is going to become a big theme coming up in the next months. But what's interesting is it wasn't the officials who found it. It's citizens who are doing the work. That is my point. When we step up and we start doing our work as citizens, then we expose the fact that the system they're using is actually full of fraud and enables fraud. So we can't allow that anymore. We have to take back local control so that we can stop that.
Here's a really good one. Samantha Frost asked, do you think that President Trump placing multiple employees from CISA would help a case in court where we are trying to prove illegal votes?
I have mixed feelings about this. There's something called the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission. They're the ones who set the standards for voting in federal elections around the country. And those are appointed positions by the president. So, on the one hand, I don't like having all these government agencies. Over the back fence, absolutely. I'm good for that. On the other hand, this is our opportunity to put in some key people in a few key places and to blow the whole thing wide open. So I'm not sure I like getting rid of CISA because they're the ones who are managing and controlling the federal network that's got all the machines connected. Most people don't realize this. When they say to you, the machines are not connected to the internet, that's a carefully crafted phrase. And most of the time they're right. It's connected to a cell phone network or a federal secure network, but they're connected. And they're being monitored. It's national infrastructure. Our elections are being monitored over networks, and they're not supposed to be. And EAC has said they're not supposed to be. And guess who's in charge of that? CISA. So now if you get rid of that agency, you're sort of covering up the evidence. I'd rather replace heads of those organizations with people who are going to get to the bottom of things and expose all that. But that's why I say I have mixed feelings about it.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. So
let's seize our opportunity here. We got our wrecking ball going, but we want to be careful with our wrecking ball not to destroy the evidence either.
Absolutely. The next question. Do you think the voter rolls would get worse if people are solely focused on registering voters?
Well, Pennsylvania's rolls got worse this last time around, and that was with Scott Pressler out there pounding the pavement like crazy. I mean, whole national focus was on Pennsylvania, and Vico made a graph recently showing 3 election cycles in a row, and it was reducing every time, and it was the worst of all this last time around. So, in other words, the Republicans registered fewer registered voters than they have in the last 3 cycles, and your voter rolls are dirty. So I guess if I didn't express an opinion, if I looked at the data, I'd say that registration drives aren't the answer. The answer is you want clean voter rolls, but to get clean voter rolls, you got to take back local control. Let me branch off this. This is something that I've been teaching people to do at the local level. What if today in your county you made a copy of your voter rolls? Boink, you got it. So you have a timestamp, you have a snapshot in time. Now you take that and you clean that list. How do you do that? Well, you audit it, you knock on doors. I mean, that's the way they used to do it. They knocked on doors. The PTA moms used to go around and check the poll books all the time. That's what they did, the precinct books. Okay? You clean that voter rolls. Now the state comes in next month and says, oh, we want you to add a bunch more people. Well, now you screen every one of those. You don't let them into your rolls. By the way, this is not a government agency. This is you. This is your committee in your county, maintaining your own rolls. And you're checking the death records, and when the state comes in and says somebody died, you take them out of yours, you confirm it first. In other words, you're maintaining your own rolls. Now what's going to happen over time is you're going to end up with a good, clean voter rolls. It may not be perfectly up to date, but it'll be close. You're not trying to stop anybody from voting, but you know who's a real voter and who's not. And then when the election happens, you've got a good list to work from. You'll know who the real voters are and who they're not. And then you can show your list to the county and show them what a crappy job your state is doing and what a crappy job the system is doing. And the fact that it's so bad is it's the engine for the fraud. And so that's a powerful thing that you can do, and you're actually being the government then. You're actually managing your own roles. And I got this idea from Chris Jersky in Florida. I built on his idea, but his basic idea was he cleaned the voter rolls for his county, showed his clerk. And she was like, whoa, I want my voter rolls to be clean. So she used his information and cleaned her own voter rolls. Then she was going around bragging to the other counties, look at how clean my rolls and yours are so dirty. It started a competition between the counties to see who would have the cleanest voter rolls. And their software that he was using, and he was working with the teams around the state. And so the counties began to compete with one another. So wouldn't it be interesting? That's what gave me this idea. Wouldn't it be interesting if you compete with your own county? We have a better voter rolls than you have, and here's the evidence, and here are all the people that don't belong in our voter rolls that are dead, and here are the ones that are, and you're not maintaining the rolls, and yet we're paying you to do it? You're fired. We're taking over.
Dr. Frank, we are being asked if you can put up your slide of the 7 steps so that people can take a screenshot of that.
If you want a copy, I'll send you PDFs and everything. Just send me an email. I also have something I call Launching Your 7 Steps movement in your county. It's a checklist, 2-page. So if you, and there's other stuff I'll send you too. So and it's all free. So, send me an email and I'll send you all this stuff. You can have nice PDFs of it. I haven't really talked about 7 steps on this talk. The first step was get connected. Everybody in this call, I give you a check mark next to get connected. Good job. Step 2, get organized. This is your war council. You need to build a war council. This is where most efforts fail all around the country. Everybody thinks that, all they need is their own silver bullet, their lawsuit, whatever. Oh, we got the evidence of fraud. We're all ready to go. No, sorry. Step 2, you got to have your war council. You're not going to win this war by yourself, guys. You got to get organized. And you need at least 7 people on your team. I was with a team this weekend in Montgomery County, Ohio, and the team leader is working his butt off. He's a really good data guy. And he's like, I'm trying to do all these tasks. No wonder I'm not getting anywhere. You could be the best sniper in the world, but you lose the war. You got to have an army. You got to have infrastructure. You got to have research. You got to have strategy. You got to have leadership. You got to have an organization.
Absolutely. And speaking of the get involved, if you are on this call and you've never gotten involved with Cause of America before, you can go to causeofamerica.org. And you can click on the Get Involved tab, fill that out, and we will get you connected, just like Dr. Frank said, with the group in your state so that you can get involved locally as well. We'll take 2 more questions because I do have one good one that I think a lot of people would want to know. Okay. You mentioned how in Pennsylvania you were looking at the NGOs that have access to the voter rolls.
Yeah.
And so Susan Heffling asked, how do you find out what NGOs have access to your state's voter rolls, and is there a partisan bias to those NGOs?
Oh boy, that's a great question. All right, so the answer is and it's just sort of the same answer as the voter rolls. It's different state to state. Some states reveal the list, some states don't. In Pennsylvania, when we showed the legislators that Vico can speak to this better than me, but it was more than 32, a minimum of 32 NGOs were making changes in your voter rolls before the 2020 election. It was probably 3 or 4 times that. But we knew that at least that many. And the way we were able to do this by looking at the logs, which we had access because we had legislated back. Tony Shoup showed me a list today that I think you guys got through Right to Know. Some states it might be legal, in some states it might not. What's interesting about the list, so I think that's the first part of the question I answered. The interesting thing about the list is once the legislator, I think it was Russ Diamond who we showed it to him, he proposed a bill to the legislature to say, we want to get rid of this. We want no non-government organization, NGO, to have access to the voter rolls. We want only government organizations to have access, like the health department, because when people die, they can take them out, or the DMV, because we're registering people that way, or whatever. They wanted only official government agencies to have access. It never even made it out of committee. Why wouldn't it make it out of committee? Because government likes having all these NGOs, they're like boots on the ground for them, doing their dirty work. And when you look at the list of who the NGOs, I looked at 2 pages worth of it. The top 2 pages of the most active from Pennsylvania, there wasn't one conservative organization on there. They were all things like Rock the Vote and, Black Lives Matter and that sort of, and the Hillary Clinton campaign was one of the biggest. You can imagine, I know that sounds strange, but it's true. So there are all these it's very left-leaning. And it's the same way with the Zuckerbucks. The Zuckerbucks flowed into those NGOs. And it's the same thing with USAID. Isn't that wonderful now that that's come out? All this stuff is all connected through our elections, which is why you have to take back your elections. You can't count on the government to fix it. It's the problem. You got to take it back local.
That's the biggest thing I think that we have learned over the last 4 years is local action is really what's going to make the biggest impact.
And people complain all the time, Dr. Frank, we can't take it back local because the Secretary of State says it's legal or not legal. And I always just tell them this example. I say, if the government comes up to you and says, we're going to take away your guns, this is my 45. I like my 45. The government says, we're going to take away your guns. What do you say? You say to them, which end do you want first? Why can you say that? You can say that because it's a violation of your constitutional rights. They can't take them away. So the point I'm making is you don't have to comply with any law or policy that violates your constitutional rights. So one of the objectives of the 7 steps is for you to prove in your own community to your own leaders that your constitutional rights are being violated because fraud, every case of fraud, is nullifying one of your citizens' votes. It's violating their rights. So guess what? You're holding them accountable and you're saying, we're not going to allow you to use this anymore. We will not comply with the state system anymore because it's stealing our votes, and we don't have to comply with any system that's violating our constitutional rights. And then there's, of course, that's kind of just the overall broad brush strategy, and there's all kinds of nuances, but that's the principle.
We're also getting questions if you can put up your contact information one more time. There's been a lot of questions about how to get voter rolls and what do we do? Do we need to foil somebody in New York? It really depends on state, right, Dr. Frank? Some states you can just get right off the Secretary of State site. Some you actually have to order, just like we talked about at the beginning. Unfortunately, like Alabama's voter rolls cost almost $40,000 to get. So it's really different in every state. That's something you'll probably want to look up.
Yes. Now, if Alabama, I remember Mr. Lindell paid $30,000 for the rolls back in 2021. Mm-hmm. He gave them. I was with him when we did that, but realized that the parties have the rolls as well. That's one of the reasons why taking back control of your party is important, because it'll give you inside information that you couldn't get otherwise. Or running as a candidates are entitled to their rolls. And if the state's giving you heck, work the local level. Like in Kentucky, we've been unable to get the state to cooperate with us. So we've just been going campaign by campaign. And we've got about 2/3 of the counties in Kentucky. We've got the voter rolls. But we had to go campaign by campaign, finding somebody in each of the campaigns to get the rolls from. So you see where that's going. Every state's different. By the way, that's why you need a team. Because if one person says, oh, I'm going to get the voter rolls and save the world, you're going to fail. I'm telling you now. It's like you're being a tank driver. You might be the best tank driver there is, but you got to have infrastructure. You got to have, snipers and, your supply lines and all those things. You need a team. And one of the team people is a researcher, and that researcher figures out how we're going to get this and how we're going to get that.
Thank you so much. I know there's still a ton of questions, but we're going to
try and email them to me.
Yes, I was just going to say, we're going to try and have you back, or you guys have that email right there. Another thing, if you guys are going to be at CPAC this week, both Dr. Frank and Mike Lindell will be there this week. You guys can look up the Lindell TV booth there, and you can find Dr. Frank and Mr. Mike Lindell there. And like I said, next week, Monday night, we have our second session, Robert's Rules. Dr. Frank mentioned it earlier with our amazing ladies, Ellen and Karen from Kentucky. I love them so much. And we will try and work on having Dr. Frank back because we love having Dr. Frank. And we're so thankful that you took the time on a Monday night. And I just want to thank everybody else that came on. Again, if you want a copy of the recording from tonight, you can go to info@causeofamerica.org. And again, to get involved, go to causeofamerica.org and you can look at our Get Involved tab. And Dr. Frank, thank you again. Everybody who joined us tonight, thank you guys so much. And we will see you next week on Monday night. Have a good night, everybody.